Hi and welcome to SCW, the wrestling channel here on YouTube.com. Thank you for choosing the channel and choosing the video. Please subscribe right now. Leave any comments in the comment section. Please like and share the video as well. Taking your questions from Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Of course, this is another edition of hashtag AskSCW here on YouTube. You can also leave a question here in the comment section of this video. Leave the hashtag AskSCW and you know that I'll be answering on the next video. You can follow me on Twitter at SCW Wrestling Channel, which is at SCW_Steve. You can also follow me on SCW The Wrestling Channel on Instagram and Facebook. So without further ado, let's dive into the questions this week for Ask SCW. First one comes from Daniel Decius. How do you feel about Raw versus SmackDown versus NXT? Just the question I wanted this week as well. It was first announced at Crown Jewel, wasn't it? And of course, we've got a sneak peek of what it's going to be like at this past week on SmackDown. Personally, for me, there is the concern that when we look at the three brands, that NXT is going to be featured as perhaps the weaker brand when all three compete at Survivor Series. From a concern standpoint as well, I wonder how some of the matches will be put together, particularly the traditional Survivor Series matches. Will we have like members of each team on elimination? Or will we have like Raw versus SmackDown for one match, SmackDown versus NXT, then Raw versus NXT? Maybe that could be a way they could get around it so that maybe all brands could get some form of victory on the card. I imagine the championship matches as well, or the champions will perhaps be involved in triple threat matches. That I'm perfectly fine with as well. Particularly the women's match, I'll be very excited of an idea of Becky Lynch, Shayna Baszler and Bayley in the triple threat. I think that would work really, really well. But seeing how it's first played out on TV this week, of course, with SmackDown, with the NXT invasion, was perfect timing, and the way it was put together, especially as a lot of the people didn't get back from Crown Jewel in time with the delays, it was perfectly put together. For me, the best SmackDown this year. I really enjoyed it. And it made me feel that actually there is a taste of this that's really going to be good leading into Survivor Series. I think it's a partnership as well that works really well together. Look at NXT. It's fresh, quite new on the USA Network, and maybe ratings aren't as strong as maybe what WWE would want. They are losing to AEW Weekly. Well, this way, they've been put on SmackDown. They're probably going to get a chance on Raw, and they're going to get a major pay-per-view as well. They are going to actually spread the word of NXT, and a lot of fans that perhaps weren't into NXT may decide that they need to start giving it a go. So for this reasoning, I think it's a fantastic, business move to do here. The only thing they have to do is not bury NXT in the process. Perhaps maybe a few matches. If NXT is going to lose in triple threat matches, maybe they're not the ones that are pinned or covered. That way, they don't look as weak. If they're losing every single match, there's not really a reason to turn us out, well, I need to tune into NXT every week. But of course, they can't put them as the dominant brand either, because otherwise the developmental outweighs the other. I think we all know, though, SmackDown will be probably the victors this year at Survivor Series. They took a hammering last year with a clean slate, you could say, on the main show when they lost to Raw. Now it's on Fox. I don't quite see that happening. I think that this time round, SmackDown will be the victors at the end of it. But it'll be interesting to see, and I think great build. I mean, we've had a great start to the build here. I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to play out over the next few weeks. I mean, the thing is as well here, before I move on to the next question, one thing I've not touched on, we could even get Raw and SmackDown superstars invading NXT on a Wednesday, which, for that reasoning, is going to give you a good indication of thinking, I need to watch everything WWE. The idea maybe for those people that are interested in the main roster, maybe like the idea of the OC, maybe Roman Reigns, Braun Strowman, all going down to NXT for a night. It certainly would be exciting for many. I think it's going to be a great invasion angle. It's going to play out. The only factor I've kind of got against it is it's usually just done for the pay-per-view and then completely forgotten about once a year. I would love to see a kind of a rivalry where we see this, where these guys always generally, they see themselves as the competition and they want to be the superior brand and they do what it takes to become the superior brand. Whether that means, rather than having these drafts that seem to be outdated, these superstar shake-ups, why not when, like we've seen here with Finn Balor, when someone is not really doing their best on a particular show or they don't have a direction to go, you move them over, you change, because that person can make an impact on the next brand, and it can look like that it's almost been stolen within the networks, within WWE. Triple H has stolen Finn Balor from Raw or SmackDown. You can see that maybe that the Velveteen Dream has been stolen by Raw or SmackDown, and that way, I don't know, it gives that sense of competition, and I think it would be a lot more exciting TV, and people would feel that need to have to watch on a weekly basis. So for me, I think that would be very exciting. The only other thing I would look at is the other brands within WWE. 205 Live, will it be disbanded? I'm not sure. NXT UK, now that could be interesting as well, because those guys would come under the NXT banner. I always want to see NXT versus NXT UK. At the minute, we seem to have it with the very major brands, but certainly it will be interesting to see. I have a lot of positive feeling after this last week on SmackDown, and I think Survivor Series is going to be pretty interesting this year. I'd love to know your feelings in the comments below. Let me know what you think about Survivor Series this year. I think, as particularly after we saw SmackDown this past week, definitely for me, easily the best of the year. Full of surprises, twists, turns. We got a mega main event on free TV, Daniel Bryan and Adam Cole, a dream match that we got to see on TV, not having to wait for a pay-per-view. This is the sort of stuff that people will turn around and go, I want to tune into that next week, because it had a real throwback to something that you'd see back in the 90s growing up. So, yeah, SmackDown for me was absolute top-notch, and I think NXT was a massive part of that. Next question comes from Austin Whitley. When do you see The Undertaker versus The Fiend? WrestleMania 36 or Survivor Series 2020 for the Taker's 30th anniversary? Interesting, as we just talked about this year's Survivor Series. It'd be interesting to see if they did the brand warfare next year, because like you say, it's the 30th anniversary for The Undertaker. For me, I feel The Undertaker will continue on till Survivor Series next year, and I think there would be a good place for him to have a farewell, but I do kind of feel that he will always finish at a WrestleMania. So I do wonder if this year, or it would be the following year. I think The Fiend would be the right person to take The Undertaker out altogether. You definitely need to give someone the rub, and The Fiend is that larger-than-life kind of character, an Undertaker-esque style character who could really carry the torch and move forward with it. The question is, will The Fiend still be the same Fiend we see now in 6 months, in 12 months? I think that's the big question we have to ask. If WWE continues to push Bray Wyatt, the Fiend character, like this, he's definitely the right guy to finish the Taker. I'd be happy to see it at WrestleMania. I'd be happy to see it at Survivor Series. I originally thought, looking this past sort of few months, that we were going to get it at Crown Jewel, because the Fiend was taking out legends left, right and centre each and every week. He even took out Kane at one stage, so I thought that they were building towards that, but it wasn't the case at the time. But maybe it could link into something in the future, because the Fiend, he doesn't forget. And of course, a WrestleMania match with The Undertaker back, I think it was WrestleMania 31. That was a match many people look and say Bray Wyatt should have won that. There was no need for The Undertaker to win that, so maybe it's a right that needs to be wronged by The Fiend. So I'm fine with it any time. The right time is when they're going to continue to push The Fiend and make him benefit and prosper from this victory, because otherwise it's completely pointless and someone else should take up The Undertaker instead. Next question comes from Noob and Co. Who will face Riho for the AEW Women's Title at Full Gear? And ever since the Kabuki Warriors turn heel, will a storyline where Asuka redeem herself by beating Becky for the Raw Women's Title? Then she'll get revenge on Charlotte Flair, who is now a face, at WrestleMania 36. Two very interesting questions. I'll start quickly with AEW, as that's the top question given there. Riho has gone through the roster quite quickly, hasn't she? You start to wonder who is left for her to face. Because the women's division for me isn't the strongest in AEW. And I think I've said that so many weeks on here, so I won't bore everybody repeating myself week after week. But someone who she hasn't faced for me is Bea Priestley. And I think Bea Priestley has got a lot to offer in the ring and would be, for me, a creditable challenger. I believe she had some sort of mini program going on with Britt Baker at one point, but that seems to have been almost called off a little bit for the time being, although I must admit I haven't seen this week's AEW yet, just purely for timing-wise, work-wise. I do aim to see that after this video, so unfortunately I am slightly behind on AEW at this particular stage, but if I had to pick one, I think Bea Priestley would be a good candidate for that role. As for the Kabuki Warriors, the heel turn so far, I've really enjoyed it. I love the little change with Asuka. I love the face paint, the mist. It's kind of got an evil feel about it. Even Kairi Sane, she's dressed in very dark black colours instead of that pure white where she was that innocent kind of good kind of pirate girl. I have liked the heel turn so far. As for redeeming herself, personally, you're probably not going to like my answer, but I don't see it going that far. I think Becky's the one that needs to right the wrong here. She lost to Asuka at the Royal Rumble. I think that is where that's going to end. But would I like to see Asuka pushed in that role, in that way? Definitely. I would love to see it because, first off, I think Becky's title reign for me is coming towards where it should be, moving onwards now, or perhaps maybe at least a couple of months break so she can fight towards the championship. I think it's best for faces when they're chasing belts rather than continuously holding them for long spells. I think heels deserve longer reigns as champions. And as for Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania, yeah, that would redeem something there from a couple of years ago, and it feels that since that moment, that's where Asuka really took a start of her downhill spiral. So we talk about the Fiend getting revenge from a previous WrestleMania. Asuka could do one with one as well. So would I like to see it? Yes, but sadly, do I think it's going to happen? No. Next question comes from Samuel Decius, and he asks, WWE always seems to have the heels take a loss on big pay-per-view matches. Do you think the main roster lacks on building, I believe that's competition? Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, it's not always the case. We look at Crown Jewel, the Fiend Bray Wyatt, technically a heel, he's become Universal Champion. There are times where the heels do get the victory, but I do agree with you, more than not, WWE likes that feel-good story and always has a happy ending at the end. It almost feels typical that the bad person will do something bad, will be a coward afterwards, and eventually the face becomes the mega superhero and gets the victory in the end, whether it's Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, or whoever. For me, it's kind of sad because you look at certain heels, and Drew McIntyre, Samoa Joe, two to there, Randy Orton, Lashley, Elias. I mean, there's so many heels that have got potential to be great in WWE. Kevin Owens was a great heel when he was a heel. You know, I just look at these guys and think that they get so far, and then, yeah, they're kind of booked into this corner where they have to lose to people like Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, you know, those people that are top of the card, and the mega faces of the company. So I do agree with you. I think it's a shame that it does happen. I would like to see a bit more variety. I think would add excitement as well if you see the heels win more often. But we do get times where heels do get the victory. You look at the women's division, Bayley, she's become women's champion again. The Fiend is a champion. Brock Lesnar is currently the champion of WWE as well. But now newly Raw sided with the WWE Championship. So the heels do get their moments. It's just, unfortunately, WWE seems to focus too much on building their faces of being the top person in the company. You look back to the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression Era, Triple H was arguably a face of the company when Triple H and Steve Austin moved aside. And Triple H was a heel, and he was always built up so well as a heel that when the victory was put over him and he was to lose the championship, that person got a rub and then they become a bigger superstar for it. It feels at the moment that the heel needs that big victory to become a superstar over the face, and I think that's where the problem lacks. It's almost gone back to the golden era times where Hulk Hogan would always defeat the big bad person when it comes to, you know, a WrestleMania or a pay-per-view. Hogan always got the victory. And I mean, when we look at Crown Jewel, just gone as well, the picture that was given for me at the time with this tweet was Team Hogan and Team Flair. Team Hogan in Saudi Arabia was always going to go over, especially with Roman Reigns as the captain. It's like two of the biggest faces, the faces of the company at certain stages within the history of WWE. Ric Flair had a small time as the champion in '92, but sadly, you know, he didn't really have the longevity like Hogan did. So for me, it was always a no-brainer that Team Hogan would win. And when you look at that team, Chad Gable, or Shorty G, I should say, Ali, you know, there were guys on that team that seemed incredibly a lot weaker than you looked with the heel team when we had Randy Orton, Lashley, you know, Drew McIntyre. You know, that those guys were, for me, a lot more creditable and stronger. And I think that those guys should have got the victory when you look at that 5-on-5 tag. Sadly, the faces were given the victory. And yeah, I would say it is damaging to the heels. So I would like to see that change. I would like to see the heels get more momentum going forward, perhaps as we move in towards 2020 within WWE. Before I move on to the next question, we're just going to link this into AEW. Look at Chris Jericho with the Inner Circle. Chris Jericho's not lost yet, and he's a heel, and he's a big name. When he loses that AEW Championship, whenever that happens, whenever it may be, maybe 2 months, maybe at Full Gear next week, maybe 6 months down the line, someone is really going to get the rub from that. Someone's going to become a star, which is why AEW is doing it right. They build the heels really strong, and it's for the faces to dethrone them. Next question comes from Pro Wrestling Talk. Are you a gamer? If so, what wrestling game is your favourite? Yeah, I'm not as much of a wrestling gamer as I used to be, but I am a wrestling gamer. I have got the WWE game, goodness knows, from whenever. Really, I've always bought WWE games from a child all the way through. WWE 2K20 is the first time I've not bought a WWE game in at least 20 years. And that tells you something, that I think the quality of those games is massively going down. For me, my favourite era of those games are the SmackDown vs Raw games, particularly for the GM mode. I was a big fan of that, and I really would like to see that reintroduced. Perhaps maybe in a new twist, maybe with Universe mode. I think they could combine them and make that a mega special feature on the game, because I find Universe mode particularly boring. Just because of the fact, yeah, you can make your own shows, yeah, you can have these twists and turns and storylines put into it, but I think the storylines are repetitive. I find the promos don't make much sense. You just got to click the buttons as quick as you can to make it seem like that you're not quiet with the audience. And I'd like to see a bit more competitiveness. I want a reward for putting on a good show. I remember the first SmackDown games that used to get ratings for those shows, and that used to mean something. And you used to think, oh, I want to put a new show on, see if I can beat the last show. You had GM mode because you wanted to be the #1 show. You wanted to be Raw beat SmackDown or SmackDown beat Raw. I loved that. For roster purposes, my other favourites would be SmackDown Shut Your Mouth, and of course, Here Comes the Pain. Those two are probably gameplay-wise are probably my two favourites, because those two had those amazing rosters. When you look at WWE 2002, had the combine of the WCW and ECW rosters with WWE, same as the following year. I believe Goldberg as well was a part of that. So, I mean, for me, those are probably the top ones. I love the THQ games as well, just to say No Mercy, WrestleMania 2000, the WCW ones. The THQ games were amazing back in my childhood, in my teens. I spent countless hours playing those games and absolutely loved them. So if I had to go in an order, now I've made it sound now I'm really I've just given all the games as a great options, but I would say for me the top choices probably would be SmackDown Shut Your Mouth and probably Here Comes the Pain. I would follow that with the GM modes, because GM mode I could spend hours on and would still play it today if I had the opportunity to. And last but not least, but for third, I would probably go with WWE No Mercy or WrestleMania 2000. Absolutely loved those style of games back in the day, and I think actually games from today could take some notes of the old school games and bring them back, because I do find currently today's WWE games too complicated, especially with submissions and breaking points. I do find as well that I just find the sort of fancy gameplay thing they've added this year probably fun for some. It's not fun for me. It's not for me, and there's not enough competitive nature within the game. Graphics are amazing, although I've heard this year is not as amazing. I've heard there's lots of glitches this year as well. Commentary needs to massively improve as well. So those are my sort of criteria of why I want the game to improve, and also why probably I'm, for the first time in many years, not investing in the game. Last question comes from Straight Edge Price. Do you think Chris Candido deserves a Hall of Fame induction? I was a fan of Chris Candido, sadly not with us anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, he was a former tag team champion as Skip, part of the Bobby Donners in WWE. I loved him as part of the Triple Threat as well in ECW with Bam Bam Bigelow and Shane Douglas. And not everyone that goes in the Hall of Fame is a main eventer. So, I mean, if he was maybe a second or third kind of, from the bottom kind of inductions, then yeah, I'd be on board with it. I mean, of course, not as a headline act, but yeah, he was a great athlete back in the day, no gimmicks needed. I was a fan of Chris Candido, so I would be personally in favour if he was to be put in the Hall of Fame. And as I say, not everyone that's gone in is a main eventer. I mean, you look at someone like Coco Beware, he's a Hall of Famer, so I don't see why it wouldn't be a possibility. I thought that Chris Candido had a lot to offer back in the day, and yeah, I personally would be on board with it. But that's all from me anyway here on Ask SCW. Remember, you can leave the hashtag AskSCW here on YouTube, on Twitter, Instagram or Facebook. And I will answer it for you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Take care.